The right to vote, the ability to vote, the question of whether or not the playing field is tilted to one candidate or the other, to one party or the other, that has become basically the theme song to what happened in this year's elections, or if not the theme song, at least the background music. There is a weekly newspaper in Wisconsin called Isthmus. Isthmus. It's one of those words I can't say no matter how many times I try to say it. Isthmus. I-S-T-H-M, isthmus. I can't say sixth or procurement or isthmus. There you have it. That's my kryptonite. I can't say those things. The website Think Progress Today picked up this graphic that Isthmus made to show the election results this year in Wisconsin. And honestly, I think it's pretty much as clear as you can possibly get in terms of showing what happened in this election and showing what the challenge is right now for the Democratic Party nationwide. In Wisconsin this year, Democrats actually did great. Democrats sort of ran the table in Wisconsin. And this actually shows the Democratic votes and the Republican votes for all the statewide races that were on the ballot in Wisconsin this year. So Secretary of State in Wisconsin, the Democrat got more votes, the Democrat won. State Treasurer, the Democrat got more votes, the Democrat won. State Attorney General, the Democrat got more votes, the Democrat won. U.S. Senator, that was the Tammy Baldwin seat. Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin got way more votes. She won in a landslide. And of course, the governor's race. Republican Governor Scott Walker lost his seat, replaced in the governor's mansion in Wisconsin by Tony Evers. After Evers, the Democratic candidate, got more votes. Democrats did great. They won every statewide race in Wisconsin. And now look at this, though. This is the story of our time. While Democrats were busy sweeping every statewide race in Wisconsin, they also absolutely swept the state assembly. So this is people voting for their state legislator. Way more people went to the polls on Wisconsin on election day in Wisconsin and voted for a Democrat for their state legislator than voted for a Republican. Democrats got a majority of those votes. Clearly, 53% of the votes cast for state legislators in Wisconsin were cast for Democrats. Republicans down to 45. Democrats beat them by an 8-point gap in terms of the state legislature. And now look at the results in terms of seats won in the legislature. Even though Democrats got a big majority of the votes, even though the Republicans did not get half the votes that were cast for the legislature, Republicans got 64% of the seats. Why is that? Because they tilted the playing field. They drew the district so it's almost like no matter how many more votes Democrats win, they can never get the majority. They can never get control. They can never get power. That's how it happened in Wisconsin this year. This month. We saw the same thing happen in state after state. Here's how it worked in Pennsylvania. Again, the Democrats just shellacked the Republicans in terms of the number of people who turned out and voted for a Democrat to represent them in the state legislature. Democrats won those votes by 8 points. That's a huge margin. And the Pennsylvania legislature will nevertheless come back with Republicans holding a majority of the seats. Same thing happened in Michigan. A majority of voters who turned out and voted for who they wanted to represent them in the state legislature, a majority of voters in Michigan voted for a Democrat to be their state legislator. And nevertheless, a majority of seats in the legislature will go to the Republicans. Same dynamic at work in North Carolina. More people voted for a Democrat to represent them in the legislature than voted for a Republican. The Democratic vote margin was like 2.5 points over the Republicans. But the Republicans will come back with a majority, with 54% of the seats, even though the Democrats beat them in the vote. It's because they've tilted the playing field. This is what Republicans have engineered all over the country with their control of state legislatures, to rig the electoral map. So Democrats can't really ever get power no matter how many votes they get, no matter how many more votes they get. You see it in state by state, in all of these state legislatures. And that translates to a national tilt as well, right? Where the Democrats have to win by gigantic margins in order to pull in even a modest majority in the U.S. House. Nate Silver at 538.com today points out that Democrats actually had huge turnout in congressional races this year across the country. They had about an 8-point popular vote win over the Republicans in congressional races. In terms of raw numbers, quote, about 60 million people turned out to vote for Democrats for the House this year. That is a crazy number, according to Nate Silver. What it means is that almost as many people turned out to vote for a Democratic member of Congress in this midterm election as turned out to vote for Donald Trump in the presidential election 2 years ago. There's no precedent for that in U.S. history. People turning out to vote in presidential election year numbers when there isn't a president on the ballot. It's just never happened before. Democrats had huge turnout. They beat Republicans in terms of the popular vote for Congress by like 8 points. And yet, Democrats will take control of the House in January with a relatively modest majority. because the playing field is tilted against them. In order for Democrats to fix that, they're going to have to win governorships and state legislatures all across the country, or they're going to have to continue to try to convince states, either through the courts or through ballot measures, to adopt nonpartisan maps in the future that aren't tilted either way. In the meantime, though, there are short-term fights to be fought. There is a U.S. Senate race that happens a week from tomorrow. There is a Secretary of State race in the really important purple state of Georgia that happens 2 weeks from tomorrow. And can we put up those North Carolina graphs again? Just put up the North Carolina numbers. Do we have just that? Right. All right. Right after Thanksgiving weekend, on Monday of next week, a week from today, you want to know what one of these fights is? A week from today, Republicans in the U.S. Senate have scheduled a vote on a lifetime federal judgeship for the North Carolina Republican lawyer who created the map in North Carolina that did this to the partisan balance in that state. It's a Republican lawyer, longtime party apparatchik in North Carolina named Thomas Farr. Courts denounced his work as a blunt, quote, racial gerrymander and struck it down. When he advised the state legislature on a package of voter laws that was described as being maybe the worst voter suppression package ever passed by a modern state legislature, that was denounced by a federal appeals court as, quote, targeting African Americans with almost surgical precision. You look at the tilt of the playing field, right? You see it nationwide. You see the effects nationwide. And you look at it, see how it plays out state by state, these state-by-state perversions of the democratic process, this tilting of the playing field. And you think, my God, the structure is messed up. What can be done? But each of these maps, each of these states, they have an author. There are personalities and individual state-by-state, law-by-law, court ruling by court ruling fights behind each one of these skews. And 1 week from today, the North Carolina author of this bias, this skew, this perversion of the democratic process in that state will be before the U.S. Senate, with every senator in the United States Senate having a chance to vote yes or no to make him a federal judge for the rest of his life. Even the long-term, big-picture battles in American politics break down into small-scale, short-term, winnable fights. Even right around Thanksgiving. You'd be surprised.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.